Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have Caroline Rena with us. She is a grief alchemist, spiritual guide, transformative coach who helps support empaths, highly sensitives, and seekers in healing trauma, transmuting grief, and reconnecting with the truth of who they are. Caroline brings deep, compassionate, intuitive insight and soul level guidance to her work. She's a former Army brat, military spouse, and an 8-year veteran, and her journey has led her to embrace her gifts as a healer and a midwife of truth. She helps others release inherited patterns and nervous system imprints, raise their frequency, and embody their divine purpose. Caroline is the host of the Awakening Soul Divinity Podcast, a space for honest, heart centered conversations on healing, awakening, and transformation. Through her offerings, podcast, and YouTube channel, she fosters a supportive spiritual community devoted to uncovering the truth and co creating a more awakened world. And so, Caroline's here to share with us her grief story today. And without further ado, I want to welcome her onto the podcast. Caroline,
Thank
nice to
you,
see you again.
Chris. Yay, a long time, very long time since we last saw each other.
Yes. And for listeners today, Carol and I recorded a podcast on her show about 2 to 3 hours ago.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're just swapping on each other's show today. So stay
Right.
tuned for some great content.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Let's see where we can go with this one. So I did want to make a correction. It's called the Awakening Soul Divinity Podcast. I don't know if
Ah,
that was incorrect on there or you just didn't see it right or what, but that's okay. I just want to make sure everybody knew what the right name was. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. So here we go. What are we doing?
definitely. Well, what we're doing today is we're talking about grief stories and healing journeys because everybody that I bring onto my show comes on here to talk about those two parts of life. Because as I've come to find, grief is something very misunderstood and something that is not very well talked about in society. And so we've got a lot of people who have listened to this show, by the way, who have been going through a lot of grief in their life in various components. And it's through the stories of my guests that they get to learn how to navigate their own grief journey. And so, what I'm really looking forward to you doing is sharing with us a little bit of your grief story in your own life. And we'll dive into some questions to get to the healing side of things later on in the show today. So, I
Okay.
wanted to start off with you sharing your grief story.
All right, sharing my grief story. Okay, here goes. Um, all right, so I kind of, in order to share my grief story, I kind of incorporate my trauma story into it because if it wasn't for the trauma, obviously, I wouldn't have had the grief. So what I normally share is, I think I picked this journey to work through deep, dark stuff, so I could come out on the other side and I guess guide other people through that. So the deep, dark stuff started, well, didn't actually start there, but I'm going to start there in my childhood, where there was my parents were divorced when I was 12, and my mother pretty much left my life for mostly in my entire life until I was in my early 40s. And then I kind of reconnected with her and then disconnected with her and then reconnected again with her, which is part of my grief story, which is why I'm bringing that piece up. Now, my mother was a narcissist and a control freak, and so was my dad. And not, I mean, looking back now, that's just my story, And the thing about it is, though, over the years, and I'll follow up more later about what that looks like, or after I'm done with this part, is later in life I figured out why my mother was who she was as I was going through healing my trauma and then grieving from that trauma. So from the divorce, and I was parentified by my mother, which for those of you who don't know what parentification is, she would call me when I was like 4 or 6 years old, something like that. And she would always ask me, why don't you call me to tell me you love me? Why don't you call me to ask me how my health is? All this stuff. Who taught? That's not something you say to a 4 or 6 year old. So it really affected me. And then it happened again when I was 43, which kind of took that 8 year separation from there till the rest of the story happened. Okay. Now, fast forward a little bit into my early 20s, I got married to my children's father, and I have two children, a boy and a girl, a man and a woman at this point. My son is going to be 37. My daughter is going to be 31. And at the same time, pretty close to the end of our marriage, I had also joined the military. So when our marriage was starting to break apart, I was in the military, and my trauma there was something called military sexual trauma and harassment, more leaning into the harassment piece, but there was a little bit, meaning I was not physically raped, which thank God that didn't happen, but there was, excuse me, other things that occurred that created that environment for me. And at the same time, my ex-husband was also in the process of something called parental alienation, which basically what that is you could be in a high conflict divorce situation, or you can be in an intact family where generally one person is the narcissist, the other person is the empath. They've done research on this, that narcissists and empaths come together. And the narcissist basically lies to and doesn't tell the whole truth to the children. And the children unnaturally starts pushing that other parent out of their lives. So my children were 4 and 10 when this happened. And so I went through so much in that time frame. It went over a course of about 14 years when that happened. And then it got to the point where when my son was 14, he told me he didn't want to see me until he was ready ever again, with his father standing in the yard, while he was saying that. And then my daughter, and then when he was 18, he requested being adopted by his stepmother. And then my daughter requested that she was able to be adopted when she was 13. And it took me a while. But that's a touchy thing. It's hard to make a decision like that, but I made it because it was something in essence, and people may not understand this, but it was something I needed to do. To make the decision to let that happen. And that completely broke my heart. I remember I gave her the option of, ever seeing me again with a letter. I took her to the lake I used to go to when I was little. And then when she said, no, I don't want to, I then dropped her off early at her house. Her dad was standing at the front door. I turned around. I went around the corner. I stopped the car and I broke down, and I just couldn't bring myself back up. It took me a little while to get myself back together because I had to drive back to Pennsylvania, and I was in Virginia at the time. So anyway, so that was a huge, huge, huge chunk and my catalyst of why I do what I do now. But regardless, fast forward again, we're moving into 2021. I had just split up with a partner I was with at that time, and began my dark night of the soul journey for the next 4 years, 5 years, whatever it was, 4 years. And I did all these things, just working in, diving in, going in deep, trying to figure things out, healing my trauma. Yeah. All these things. I even did another podcast. I called it the Ride of My Life podcast. And it basically showed what my journey was. And I loved it, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I did interviews on it too. And I had a really great time, and I did enjoy it. I overwhelmed myself with the work I was doing on myself to heal and the podcast. So it was a lot of chaos. And then move forward on that. I came back in 2022 and I started driving for Uber. And then started, the people I was giving rides to, turned out this is where the highly sensitives and empaths and seekers come in, because I drove over 2,000 people in that time frame. Over 400 of them were highly sensitives and empaths. And I was like, there's something going on here. So I started paying attention. I started watching things. When was this? In 2023. Well, my therapist did not apparently know that I was in the military, and he worked with people in the military. And when I brought up the fact I was in the military, that started a whole nother thing coming up, where he was like, well, you need to go get your benefits and you need to do that. And that started putting me into a deeper hole, because it started bringing up a bunch of stuff. So all this leads to the grief piece. for sure. So I went through all that. August of 2023, I found out that my daughter, who we text here and there, found out that she was pregnant on Instagram. So I fell into a hole, a deep, deep depressive hole. I was house sitting. I was almost homeless. I was dog sitting, and the most I could do was take the dog for a walk and feed it. That's all, and sleep 20 hours a day. I was barely eating. Nothing was happening. I couldn't even go out and drive for Uber. It was done. I was done. And so one thing led to another. I found a group that helped me, a veteran group that helped me, that's down here in Jupiter, Florida. And they helped me find a place to live. And so before I get in, okay, so while I'm now here, I am in this place where I live now. And a year ago, I start going into my ancestral trauma, my ancestral healing work. So I'm digging and diving. See, I'm a glutton for punishment or something. I don't know what's going on, but I'm digging and I'm diving in and trying to figure all this stuff. And I've got my altar and I've got my, ancestors on the altar, and we're exchanging healing and, all this stuff going on. And comes back up my mother. And I remembered while I was going through the ancestral healing that when my mother died in December of 2018, that was the turning point for all of this stuff to come up and out, because I had never grieved losing her as a mother. And then I started my grief in losing her because I never had her as a mother, and then she dies, right? And so when that came up, that was the first time it really grief like exploded out of me. And then all the grief comes up about my children, my dad, when he died, and I wasn't able to be there for his when he died, because nobody told me about that he was sick and in the hospital, and all these things just started coming up. So I have the grief from my childhood, the grief from my mother dying, the grief from my children, the grief from my dad dying, the grief for me, losing all these people in my life, and all these things were going on. And one thing led to another, and I decided that I needed to do this grief. It was almost like my body was asking me to do this, because it was like it in some, I don't, you'll understand what I'm talking about. In some weird way, it like was begging, because it felt good when I did it. It's I don't know how else to explain it. It's like, go ahead, do it again, do it again. And every time I did it, it was like something, just more of that stuff just fell off. It just came off. It just came off. And yeah, so now, as far as grief goes, I've learned so much. I actually decided to, similar to you, start doing coaching in grief work. And I'm getting that all set up now, from the transformational coaching, which was from well, both trauma and grief, but now it's a little bit different. And yeah, so I still do my grief work. Stuff still comes up. And now I don't push it down. I mean, I literally push that stuff down for 58 years. That's a lot.
Wow.
That's a lot of stuck energy. And when it came up, and it was very painful. So yeah, so I'm glad I did it though,
Well, that's what I want to thank you for sharing on the podcast today, that whole story, because a lot of people are not wanting to be as vulnerable to talk about all these situations in life. And this
Yeah.
is where, when we repress and we hold all that experience down inside ourselves, it's got to go somewhere. And this is why I always tell people in grief, particularly, you'll have random pain in your body that's actually not physical pain. Funny story, it's mental pain,
Funny
because
story.
you've
Yes.
because it's trapped and it's stuck inside you. And so
Mhm.
sometimes people will come to me and say, I have a random back pain. And I said, well, have you worked out at all? And they go, no. And I said, well, have you sat in a funny way or slept funny? No. And I'll say, you probably got something going on up here that we haven't released yet, something you're not paying attention to. And believe it or not, by the way, if you ever do come across those situations and you, as I like to phrase it, hit the nail on the head with that grief story, whichever one it happens to be,
Mhm.
that pain releases itself. All of a sudden, mystically, it releases itself, and that's how you know you're working on your grief journey in a lot of
Yeah.
respects.
Yeah, yeah.
I
And it doesn't even last that long. It's like when you're in the grief, like I remember looking at a clock the first time I did this and I saw it was a certain time, whatever that was, and then I just let it go and I was going and going and going and I looked back up at the clock, I thought it was like 20 minutes later. 6 minutes, literally. So
Mhm.
it doesn't take that long for it to get out of your system. So yeah.
Yeah, so I want to recap because I took notes while you were talking, and you've
Okay.
gone through a lot of grief, a lot, and this went down to, a parentification. I want to ask you about in a minute to talk a little bit about that. The thing that I find interesting that you brought up too, because I've had some experience with narcissists in my life, and I'm very empathic in a lot of ways, is the fact that those two tend to come together, and I kind of want to start with that because this is kind of at the base of where the grief journey started with your children. Um, a narcissist is a very self-serving person. They're not very self-aware. They themselves, by the way, have gone through a lot of trauma, but they seek
Hmm.
power through other people. They don't seek it within
Hmm.
themselves.
Right.
Empaths are the total opposite people, where they're very highly sensitive, very intuitive, very much in a compassionate place of mindset, and they thrive around being around other people that come from that emotional place of collaboration, so to speak.
Yes.
Whereas a
Yeah.
narcissist thrives on taking power away from people.
Yeah.
What was that dynamic when you first realized that that's what was going on for you? What did that feel like?
Well, there was no dynamic because I really didn't figure it out until way after we were divorced and I was going through my healing process and I was thinking back to all of that. And I really didn't realize I was an empath. I mean, I knew in like, I'm 61 now. So when I first figured out a lot of stuff, I was in my mid to late 30s. And that's about the same time that things were starting to fall apart with my first husband. Now, I'm going to throw this in there. My first husband and my second husband, I practiced, just saying. Um, they were both overt narcissists. And then I had two other long-term relationships with covert narcissists. So I've had my fill of narcissism, and it took that long for me to figure this out, this question that you're asking me. So it wasn't until really when I figured out what an empath was, what a highly sensitive person was, that I'm a highly sensitive person. And there's 27 traits apparently of a highly sensitive person. And I've got 26 of them. And everybody was always saying, you're too sensitive. You cry all the, all this stuff, which turned out to actually be my superpower as opposed to them keep beating me down on this. But it was just really interesting because it wasn't until I actually understood when I was doing the Ubering with the empaths and I'm learning and I started doing research. So that was like 4 years ago, right? 3 years ago, something like that. And I started paying more attention with that whole thing. And I'm like, oh, that's why I did what I did. Because here's the thing, narcissists feed off of everyone, right? And you're right, they are traumatized. Everyone's traumatized in some way. But empaths want to save everyone. And an unhealed empath wants to save the planet, the universe. I mean, that's just the thing. Like you were saying, we want to connect with people. We want to love on people. We want to make sure that they don't hurt as much as we do. They don't go through anything that they, because we know what it feels like. So when I finally recognized that, that's when I was able to piece the thing together. Believe me, I had no clue what was going on when we were still
Mhm.
married and first married and all that stuff. I couldn't, because I believed everything he said to me, along with the gaslighting. And I was like, you know, I know there's nothing wrong with me the first time I thought that. And then little by little, I started falling into that trap of maybe there is something wrong with me. But it wasn't, like I said, until recently that I really recognized and understood what an empath was, that I recognized that there was nothing wrong with me. I made some, mistakes. Of course, that's just how life is, because sometimes we don't know until we know. But yeah, I mean, I hope that answers your question, because that's just what it was like for me. It was like way later.
Yeah, and what I find interesting too is that sometimes when we are around, we attract narcissists sometimes in our life, and sometimes that can come out, by the way, in our relationships, and we don't always see it there because it's subconscious. And I think that when you have a narcissist in your family, like a mother or a father figure, you know how to identify it really well. And the other half of that too is that it's almost like, comforting is not the right word, but you know how to be around it and you know how to
Yeah.
deal with it in a
There's a
sense. And
comfort in
so
the uncomfortable.
that's a good way to phrase that. Thank you. It's being
Sure.
comfortable with the uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
I have talked to people that have been in narcissistic relationships and they didn't fully see it up front for a lot of reasons. And one of the common things I saw though is that they were in raised in a family where that dynamic was there. And so because it was uncomfortable with the uncomfortable, sometimes they just put blinders on and didn't really see it up front, and ended up in those relationships where the pattern persisted. And so I
Mm.
I don't always see that as a mistake by any means, but I see that as pattern recognition. I see it as in there's something there trying to teach you something or a
Oh,
lesson
yeah.
trying to be shown, is what
Yeah,
I see.
absolutely. 100%. And the thing is that one of the things that I've learned over the years is all of us want, need our mother's love. And when we didn't get it in some way, that's where, I mean, we're all narcissists in some way because we just, and especially because even children at certain ages are obviously narcissistic, but when we get stuck at that age, we don't leave that narcissism. So we still want, we want what we want for ourselves. But like with the mother piece of it, because especially if we've been like highly traumatized, there's this desperation I felt, at least from my experience, where I needed it so badly. And this is subconscious. This is all under the surface. We don't know this until we start doing the work and figuring it out and grieving, and doing all that stuff. But I didn't know just how much I needed my mother to love me when I started doing things. My behavior was like, and then I just have to sit there and go, oh, crap.
We'll see. Well, see, the thing that, I'm glad we're talking about this because there's people out there that when they hear the word narcissist, they go, okay, you're just talking about somebody that's got some extreme behavior or somebody that's just having a bad day. And I always like to preface, by the way, narcissists are on their own little island with that. There's obviously people that have some rough personality traits and some rough behaviors. There's that for sure. We all have that.
Right.
Narcissists take it to a whole different level. And that's kind of where, when you dive into narcissism, I always tell people if you're curious if you have a narcissist in your life, if you happen to be researching what that term means or what it actually is, likely chance are you're in an environment where those behaviors are coming out very strongly.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you because it sounds like that played a role in your relationship too with your children in your marriage. It came up in a lot of ways. What did you assimilate the tie between how your mom treated you as a child and how that played out in your marriage? Was there any kind of connection in between there as
Sure.
you
Yeah.
went through that
Yeah.
grief healing?
Let's say, what was the last question or the last
Oh,
part?
I was just saying, did you notice any correlation between those two relationships as you were going through your grief process and your healing work?
Well, yeah, of course. So, I mean, because my mother left basically, well, she left my life and my father, it was a whole thing. He kind of forced her out. And the thing about first, before I get into anything else, this is the reason why this affected my relationship with my children. So I am a second and third generation Holocaust survivor. My mother was born in Prague, Czechoslovakia, which was the Sudetenland, in 1932. In 1939, Germany took over that area, took my well, everybody obviously was experiencing this. My grandfather was brutally beaten, and they took his business, they took his home, they took his bank accounts, they took everything. And my guess is that because of his being beaten, that when he came home after that happened, that my mother and my grandmother saw that happened physically. And that's probably where some of all that stuff started with my grandmother and her sicknesses, her bodily sicknesses, and my mother and her mental and bodily sicknesses. I don't know enough about my grandmother, but this is generational. That's where it goes. That's why I did the generational trauma work too. But with my mother, they left now follow me on this, because it's very interesting how this is happening. So we're talking about a similar time back in 1939, where things that happened at that time were very similar to what's going on right now. So I try and sit with that to see what the understanding is in that. So my grandparents took my mother at 6 years old and escaped Prague, Czechoslovakia, and went to Palestine. Actually, that was in 1938. They left and went to Palestine. And Palestine wasn't Israel until 1948. That's when it became the state of Israel. So my grandparents, so this is all the experiences that they have. So imagine, with all these things going on around the world, all this stuff's coming up, and it's coming up through the DNA. I can feel it. That's why I'm doing work with my generational, because it's all bringing this stuff up. I'm coming in a circle. It's a little slow circle, but it's coming. So what's happening is that all of this is stuck into the generational trauma for me. And my mother, who appeared, both my grandparents and my mother appeared very happy in 1936. I've got pictures of them from that time frame. Then I've got pictures of them from after the war started, and you could see their faces are drawn, all this stuff. So my mother at 6 years old, at one of the most important parts of a child's life, 0 to 7, is experiencing this stuff. So she doesn't know what's going on. She's a 6-year-old, right? And she's experiencing war, and they're escaping, and she's leaving her home, and she's, all these things I can't even imagine that she went through. But what it did was she didn't know how to be a mother for me. And so when she didn't know how to be a mother, I mean, there's an instinctual piece in there, but there's also a generational piece where, the nurturing gets kind of pushed out. And so I was never nurtured. And I know that she wasn't, because she had told me that her mother never nurtured her, my grandmother. So there was no nurturing. Now, the interesting thing is, instinctually, I'm a nurturer, I guess, because I'm an empath. So that part didn't get mixed up. But there was a lot of things that I got from my mother, like these reactive things of whatever, something happens, and I didn't know why I was reacting to them. So when I reacted, especially if my kids did something kid-like, I was reacting to something I believe now was part of that generational trauma that came through. So I didn't know how to do that, and I never really had anyone there. Like in a normal situation, when a mother gives birth, generally there's grandmothers there helping. There's, that whole lineage is supposed to be helping. I didn't have that. So I was left to my own devices to figure all this stuff out, on top of the fact that I've got this generational trauma. So there were a lot of things that I didn't know that I had to figure out myself, which, it really affected how I was with my children. And the other piece of it is, and I'm going to be open and honest about this, it's like the challenges I had with my ex-husband created something inside of me where it was sometimes challenging not to focus on what was happening with him, and not to bring it into the house with the children, or bring it into my connection with the children. And that was really challenging for me, and it hurt, because it was like they didn't deserve that, and I didn't know what to do with it. So if that makes sense. I don't know, I'm not going to go too
No,
deep.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So go.
So tell me a little bit about, I know there was some separation between you and your children at a certain age, and I know that can be very, very hard. I have talked to some people that have gone through that. What was it like being able to reconnect with your son? And, do you have, what relationship do you have with your daughter at this point? Because I know that all happened quite a long time ago. And
Mhm.
obviously, there's always this phrase in the grief world, that's why I bring this up, that time heals things. And I like to break that stereotype in many ways, because I don't necessarily believe that it's true.
It can.
But
Yeah.
if you're wanting to share your experience about that.
Sure. So, time, I don't think it's time that heals things. I think it's our dedication to healing that heals things. So I think that's more like what it was. And as time goes on, as you're doing the work, I think that's the thing that that is healing, if that makes sense. But now with my son, I think, as I said earlier, when he was 14, he just, nothing. I don't want anything to do with you. And then about 9 years later, he came back into my life, and it was so this was when he was 23. So it's about 12 years ago, I think, something like that, maybe 13 years ago. But when he first came back in, I didn't know how to handle it because I hadn't been around him in so long. He's 23 now, and he was 14 when this all happened. And I'm used to seeing him as a 14-year-old. I'm used to seeing him as a 10-year-old. I'm used to seeing him as a kid. And so my brain was not catching up, with all that. So that was very, very challenging. And we ended up, this is a great, I love this story. We ended up doing a personal development course together down here in Florida. And as the students, what happened was we were so basically what they do, what they do is they put you in the center of a room, and we're facing each other. And then there was a therapist there, who told him to tell him, or who told him, this gets a little hairy here, who told him to tell me everything that he'd always wanted to say to me. And I was sitting there going, we had just barely come back together. I mean, I think it was like a year or something like that. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh God, here we go. And I'm ready. I'm like sort of ready. I'm sitting there waiting for everything that, for him to say everything he needed to say to me. And there's not many opportunities for parents to get that. And that was a gift for me. But what happened was then the therapist says, and you have to repeat what he says back to him as close to verbatim as possible, which tests your listening skills, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm not good at listening. I don't know what I'm going to do here. Oh my God. All right. So we went through this whole process, and he told me what he needed to tell me. And somehow I managed, I don't know how, like I zoned out. Maybe I heard it, but I don't know. Somehow I managed to repeat it back to him so he could feel heard. And I knew that's what it was for. So maybe I did do it. Well, I don't know how that all worked at that point. And I certainly wasn't as far along as I am now. So it was like, I don't know what the heck was going on. But anyway, so we did that. We did that back and forth. And I could see him, what it felt like to me. He's tearing up. I guess I'm hoping he was grateful that I was hearing him, because I wanted that. I wanted him to do that. So we went through this process. And so now keep in mind, we've got all these people sitting around. There's like 150 people sitting around us while we're doing this, right? Watching this whole thing. And I'm just focusing on him, trying not to, freak out or anything with the therapist over here. And we went through it. And then when it was said and done, the therapist was like, okay, now stand up and give each other a hug. And like, he's also 6 inches taller than me. So of course my face was like smashed into his armpit, and I can't see anything, but I knew everybody was around us. But I managed to peek out, and at the side that I peeked out, I saw so many people just bawling, and I'm like, what's going on? I don't know what's happening right now, and all these people ended up in a puppy pile on us. So they all came in, and they were all hugging, and everybody's hugging, and I heard all these people. I couldn't see anything because I'm still tiny and he's taller than me. And I hear all these people crying and, all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, what is happening right now? And when we were done, people got a chance to say something about what happened. And this was really the most important piece to me. It was like, there were so many people who spoke up, who said, by watching this happen, I had an opportunity to feel like I did the same work with my mother, and that she listened and heard me. And I'm tearing up right now just thinking about that. But it's like, all these people, there's so many people who have not been heard, especially by their mothers, and feeling like they're not loved by their mothers. And there's many different reasons why that's going on. But the fact that all these people felt that, and I don't even know what I was talking about before. You'll have to catch me back up on that. But it was so important that people understand that there's this connection with mother, with that mother wound that um that runs just generationally deep. And unless we do that healing work, unless we do this work with the grief and everything, we don't get to heal that, you know? And what that did was it healed however many people in that room, probably some generations, you know, all these things. Because my female generation, the mothers and the grandmothers, they all went through something similar with losing a child, in a not that way, but in a similar way. So did that, I hope that answered.
I just had a big revelation as you were talking,
Yeah,
interestingly enough.
yeah,
You had to let go of your relationship with your son at 14 and didn't see him again till 23, right? You then got reconnected in this room with 150 people. And not only did you fix your relationship in that room, by the way, make progress with that, but you helped the lives of 150 people because of that. And had you not gone through that experience when he was 14 years old, that would never have happened. Those people would never have had that experience that day.
yeah. Don't make me cry on here, okay?
Hey, this
Yeah.
is why this is the Empower Grief Journey. This is what this is about.
Okay, here comes
This is
some
what
grief,
this
people.
is
That's kind of what's happening right now. Yeah.
that
Okay.
this is why I have people like this on my show to get them to
Yeah.
understand that
Yeah.
this stuff doesn't happen. It happens doesn't happen to you. It
Yeah.
happens for
For
you.
you. Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
where in that moment, by the way, when you're going through grief, it's you're gonna feel like shit. It's just what it is. And
Yeah.
it's not gonna feel good. But when you
Yeah.
get down to that place where you have a moment like that happen, and
Hmm.
sometimes you see that and you go, wow, wait a second here. This is much bigger than me. This is much bigger than my experience of things. And yes,
Hmm.
I did get some closure. I did get my relationship back with my kid, and that's what I wanted. This all
Hmm.
happened in front of 150 people that never felt
Yeah.
seen or
Yeah.
heard, and it showed them what that looks like.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
you think about the magnitude and the impact of that one event in your grief story, you
Hmm.
change that many lives in
Yeah.
that minute, like that. That 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 is why I call this the Empower Grief Journey, by the way, because that's exactly what you
So
pulled
worth it.
off, which is
Yeah. Yeah.
amazing. So
Wow.
I just wanted to celebrate you for a moment for that. I think
Thank
that's
you.
very, very beautiful.
Thank you so
So
much. And now I can finish. I remember why I was saying all that stuff. I said that to say this. So yesterday I had a conversation with my son on the phone, and we talked a lot. And we talked for about an hour, just about random stuff. And there was a moment on that call where I remember I stopped talking and I just kind of looked at him, and I just, like, with love, with tons of love, and I looked at him. There was no words between either one of us. He was looking at me back exactly the same way, and I could feel that from him. And holy crap. Okay. Do we cuss on this podcast?
all the time.
Okay, holy shit. Because that was like, I mean, I don't think I've ever done that with him, you know? And we're talking, he's 3,000 miles away from me, or however far away, 1,500 miles away, you know? And this is just something that it came full circle for me last night when I was talking to him. And for you to say that made it even more powerful. And yeah, so that's the part I wanted to share about him. And you also asked about my daughter. So I'm going to be brief about that, because really there's not a lot to talk about, but there's little movement. Let's put it that way with my daughter. The challenge with that is she is a lot like her dad in keeping her emotions in check. And I don't really know her that well, because I basically lost the relationship with her at 8. And so here and there, I'll text her, she'll text me back. I still send her birthday cards. I still send her, you know, messages every week, just seeing how she's doing, whatever that is. But when I found out she was pregnant, I now have a 1.5-year-old granddaughter that I've never met. So here's where that generational trauma comes in, that I also am still grieving, because I haven't been able to clear things out with her that I know of. I mean, I don't even know what that is. And it's her journey. And I've gotten to the point where I understand that. But now there's another generation involved in this, and that part is very challenging. And I still do grief work on that all the time, because it's just, um, that little girl looks like me. The coloring is the same. My daughter is lighter, light hair color, and it's just very strange. When she was born, she looked like my baby picture. So, but I mean, I'm grateful that she's here. I feel her energy all the time, but I've never met her. So that's another thing. We'll see where that goes. And hopefully in time, I'll be able to meet her, but not yet. So that's
Yeah,
kind of
well,
where
that's
we're at with my daughter.
well, I know that, people that go through estrangement with their family, it's a very hard thing, and it's something that unfortunately I've been reading about a little bit. It's happening more and more lately over the last few years. And part of what I think does happen at times with estrangement is there is some kind of disagreement, there is some kind of conflict there that happens, and it's so wide of a topic. I don't want to dive nitty-gritty to it, but
Yeah.
I'll just say that what is really powerful about the work you're doing is you are still trying to make that effort and you're still trying to show up. And I think that's where, there's a lot of grief there. You have a grief of a daughter that you haven't seen since she was 8. There isn't a really much of a relationship there, but now there's a granddaughter, like you said, and there's always going to be that break in between things that you
Hmm.
always wish had worked out differently.
Hmm.
But I always hope and pray there's, some kind of way those things will get reconciled in the future, because I do think that for some people, and it's just like what happened with your son, by the way, like there was no way to tell that what point in time you were going to reconnect with him. There was no point in time to say you would be in that personal development class with him doing deep work like that in that moment
Hmm.
that brought things closer together. And so
Yeah.
who's to say that that opportunity may not come in the future? It very well may.
It may. I still have hope. Well, and also too, I wanted to touch on what you said about, within the last few years, how more and more people, and I don't use the word estrangement because it's not exactly the same as parental alienation. It's similar,
Hmm.
but it's not a result of something. It's more of a decision of something. Like people will back off of a relationship from somebody and not even tell them why. And I'm noticing there's a lot more instances online where the maybe not maybe a little bit younger than you, but generally like your generation type of thing, and all these what do they call what do they call these people online who talk who inspire people and or
Oh,
whatever.
like motivational speakers?
Well,
Is
no,
that
no,
what
no.
you're,
It's more
or,
like they make all this money and they talk about things and people.
oh, influencers.
Influencer. Okay. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of influencer slash, you know, younger generational therapists or people who are taught or coaches or people who are suggesting, they are teaching these younger generations to cut hard on boundaries, to just, it's solid. If someone is doing something to you, done, you're done, get them out of your life, you know? And that's not always the case, because that's not really fair, I guess, for lack of better words,
Hmm.
for those of us who are actually doing the work to resolve things within ourselves as a mother. And I'm going to say that right out, because I've been working on myself for over 35 years to get to where I've gotten today. Like even 2 years ago, I wouldn't be sitting here talking about this. I was obviously in my hole at this time of year. That's exactly where I was 2 years
Yeah.
ago, right? And so for people to be out there espousing, I think that's the right word, just complete cutoff. If they treat you a certain way, you're done. That's not how that works, because you've got to give a little empathy and watch the person, or recognize that person, they've been through a lot of stuff too. It took me a lot to be able to forgive my mother, for everything that she did, but it helped me to see her as a little girl to be able to do the forgiveness work. Now these uh kids generation, whatever, nowadays, and my son always makes fun of me when I say that word because that's an old person word, but whatever. But at this time in the world, these influencers who are telling all these people to just cut things off completely. I mean, you're like completely cutting off families by doing that, because there are still people out there like me who are doing the work and who can
Hmm.
be a good place in your life, but
You know,
you're not even giving a chance for that. So I don't know, that's my own
you,
perception.
I'm gonna share with you since you and I have talked quite a bit. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna be very honest for listeners, by the way. You guys are gonna hear some real blunt truths right now.
Oh, okay.
If you're if you're an influencer coach under 25 and you have not been married, had a kid, gone through a divorce, job change, any of that stuff, I hate to break this to you, but you are not really that great of a coach, and I will share why. You have not had life hit you in the face really hard to learn those lessons. And what I have a hard time with, honestly, in the coaching industry, there are a lot of people out there calling themselves coaches. You haven't been through shit to even be a coach to tell somebody how to get through stuff. And this is where that harsh boundary you're talking about, where they just like cut people out, that's a really dumb idea in a lot of ways. I'm really going to be honest. It's a very dumb idea, and I will share why, by the way. Cutting somebody out of your life is an option. It certainly is something you can do, and I won't take that away from you, by the way, because it's warranted in certain cases. But what I will say, by the way, there are people out there that realize that they screwed up or messed up, made a mistake, said something they shouldn't, treated somebody a different way, and they do the work, by the way. And this is, by the way, not to say that you need to just forgive somebody and get over it and move on. I'm completely against those things because we're humans, we have emotions. Guess what? We're all built that way. But what I am saying is that if someone makes an effort with you and shows up, I'm not saying you got to forget the past completely and forgive everything and act like nothing happened. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying there's opportunity for that relationship to regrow itself in a different form. And this is where Caroline gave such a powerful example. She never saw her son after 14 for a long time. They came together eventually in life. When you cut somebody completely out without reason or without explanation or without any of these circumstances and evaluating if that's the right decision for you, you may well miss that opportunity in life. And I will say, by the way, that opportunity, when it gets missed, it's a big part of life that will make you a better person. And I know that's very hard to hear, but I wanted to share that. I watched a Tony Robbins documentary one time on Netflix. It's a beautiful thing. I'm not your guru. Powerful,
Yeah,
powerful
I saw that.
show. And something that in the first part of that movie, Tony talks to a young girl who's 19 years old, and she says that she's concerned about losing weight. And Tony eventually calls it bullshit, which it was, because what she was really upset about was that her dad was a drug addict and wasn't in her life. She was very, very mad at her dad. Something Tony shared that's very, very powerful, and I'm building off of what Caroline said about the cutting off people in influencer land. If you're going to blame people for all the shit they do, you better blame them for all the good they do too. That goes
Mm-hmm.
both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I will share in the grief space, by the way, because, I am in a place in my own life where my in-laws were cut out of our life. And that was made not a very easy decision to come to, but it was a place where there was a lot of hurt, anguish, and not a lot of, I want to come to the table and work on things from the other side. And so that option came. But what I will say, by the way, is that when you blame effectively, and that's what I'm asking people to do, and that's what I learned to do, by the way, is be effective when you blame. It's okay to blame people for hurting you. It's okay for saying they hurt your feelings, but also understand that they also taught you something and they also brought value to your life at one point or the other. And that's not to write off the bad stuff. Like I said, if you have to cut them out of your life, it's what you got to do. But I will say that if you look holistically at that person and you see that they make work on themselves and they show up actively, wanting to make improvements, wanting things to be better, that pattern is going to change and that pattern is going to evolve. And going into a little bit of spiritual side, I'll wrap up with this really quickly. That might be the path you're supposed to be on. Maybe things were supposed to fall apart so that they could come together in a whole different way that was better for you and better for them. And so I always like to come in that place of saying that those situations don't necessarily need to be treated harshly, but what they should be looked at in is a sense of, is this a lesson for me? Is there something I need to learn? Something I need to go through? Is this a blessing for me? This relationship came back together and I never thought that, but wow, we actually can be together and coexist. Or was it a
Mm-hmm.
gift? Did they make you a better person because of that situation you went through? There's so much more depth to go into in those moments where when you're listening to young people that I'm sorry to say have not gone through life. And I'm just being honest because when you hear Carolyn's story, about basically having both her kids out of her life at a very young age, going through assault in the military, going through narcissistic relationships, going through this generational healing work. What you were hearing is a lifetime of grief, a lifetime of struggle, a lifetime of experience. And that's the kind of person, by the way, when they are showing up and doing the work, that's the person you want in your life, by the way. That's the one that says, I'm not scared to make a mistake. I'm not scared to screw up, but I'm here to learn. And I know that I'm not perfect. And that's that's where I think that when you talked about that love feeling you got, by the way, that's what was going on there. So
Yeah, I'm gonna not be able to talk for the rest of this podcast because you keep making me cry. Um,
you know, I'll give you a minute to catch the air there. I will share with listeners, by the way, the reason I say this, and I don't mean to come across arrogant when I talk like that, but I am going to say the following. I have been fired from more jobs than I could care to share. I've lost a child, an infant, who never got to set foot in this world and see the light of day. Never got to. I watched my grandfather die in my arms and take his last breath, and I watched half my family kick me to the side. I'm going to tell you, when you go through moments like that, they are incredibly painful and they hurt like the Dickens. But I will say the following, by the way, that grief journey that we talk about on this podcast, the grief journey and the healing journey, when you go through that healing, you will look back, by the way, not with anger, not with aggression, not with frustration, but you will say that all happened for me because I never would be who I am today if I didn't go through that stuff. And when you guys come across somebody, by the way, who has gone through Carolyn's situation, for example, Carolyn might meet another woman that's gotten alienated by her kids, and she's going to say, "Hey, I understand you. I get you. I've walked that path. Let me walk this journey with you." When I run into parents that lose their children, I say, "Hey, don't even need to explain. I understand where you're at. I'm here to help." When you get in that place in life, it all becomes about love and connection, not about personal greed. And that's why grief is such a powerful transformation tool for us of stepping away from who we were and stepping into who we're becoming.
my byline of my podcast: uncover the truth of who you are. That's what grief is for.
I love that.
Just saying. Just saying.
so so I have to ask you this big question because
Okay.
you, like me, have gone through a lot of grief in life, and it's been a relentless journey through grief. How do you feel when you look at where you are today from where you came from? I
Oh,
mean, there's got to be
well,
this sense of there's got to be this sense of like accomplishment or this sense of I went through a lot of shit, pardon me, but I learned a lot of things along the way, and I am this person I am today because of this. What does it feel like when you look on your journey and see where you are today?
it's not even, it's weird when you say that because it's not really even about accomplishment because that's like a whole, that's, it's a goal. Accomplishment's a goal to me. What happens now? I mean, I see myself just on this podcast watching myself, and I'm smiling more than ever. And what I'm recognizing is it's more of a sense of peace. It's more of a sense of joy. It's more of a sense of connection and love. That's what I see on the other side of that. I don't care about the accomplishment because that's not what I'm going for. I'm going for the connection. So that's what I see. I mean, even with you, like the first time we talked, and I think we talked for like 3 hours. I was like, oh wow, I mean, I didn't have that. I never had that throughout this time with somebody being able, like you're saying, being able to talk to someone who gets it. And it was like, sure, we didn't have the same exact story that happened, but guess what? We all have the same feelings, and for someone to be able to be there to support that feeling creates the joy and the inner peace, the peace, whatever. And that's where everything's got to start anyway, was within ourselves, because that whole outside world is just a projection of what's going on in here. And I'd rather it look not, smiley and happy, or smiley and joyful and peaceful, than chaos and screaming and crying and, angry and depressed and all that kind of thing. I'd much rather see the former, so that's kind of where I'm at with that.
And what you just brought up, by the way, is the work of what our soul actually wants. And I will say this because I've been around death a lot in my life, and I will share that in our everyday world, when we're glued to our smartphones, we're on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, and we're watching all these people with their flashy lifestyles and giving us advice that haven't really walked the planet as long as half of us have. I will say the following. What really does matter is exactly what Carolyn just brought up. What your soul actually craves, by the way, is calm and peace and love and kindness and gratitude. That's really at the end of the day what this thing craves inside here. When you're out in the world looking at everything, it's a projection. It's just an image and an idea. It's a concept, but it's really not even yours at that point. But what
It's
is
a
yours?
programmed concept. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a programming. And and when you can realize, by the way, that calm and peace in life is really what brings you serenity in your world, you don't really worry about those things out there. But when somebody else comes to you, by the way, and they are in that bad place, you're able to help and you're able to serve. And that's what, and I will say this because I've talked to a lot of people in grief and in some deep scenarios. Grievers don't want to be fixed and they don't want the flashy thing. What they want is to feel seen and heard and understood. And they
Mhm,
want somebody to say, hey, I'll walk this journey with you
mhm,
because there's no one journey is worse than the other. There's no one person better than one another. There's no ego and pride or competition or any of that stuff that exists in that world of who we're supposed to be. But it's supposed to be I'm a human and you're a human. Doesn't matter about the rest. The matter is just that you're walking life one direction and I'm walking it a different way. And we have so much to learn and come together and we share so much in how we both walk our journeys together that collectively really, it's really that simple. Interestingly enough.
as hard as it is, it's that simple. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Very true.
Well, Carolyn, I really appreciate you sharing your grief journey with us today. This is an
Absolutely.
incredible, not a lot of people go through that parentification and, going through that grief. Not a lot of people do. And so I think it's something that I do think is happening more and more in society today for whatever reason. And for you to shed light on that and not just talk about how difficult that situation was, but the fact that you did a lot of personal inner healing work and really took the time to understand yourself, understand your areas of that needed improvement or needed work or things you want to change for yourself, whatever way you want to label that. I think that's a true testament to somebody that is a beautiful soul. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, as we wrap up the podcast, I usually ask my guests a couple questions. The first one is going to be if you see somebody going through grief or see somebody who feels stuck in grief, what's a couple things you would share with them to help them navigate that journey just a little easier?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is to ask for help because I was really bad at doing that. And when you ask, either ask for help or ask for something you need, because we are so, in our society, we are so afraid because we're afraid of being judged. And, Chris and I talked when we were on my podcast, we talked about, or I mentioned, we talked about the hug thing. It's like, um, if you need a hug, ask for a hug. Because, like, for me, the thing that cleared me out the most was when somebody hugged me and I could just cry for 2 minutes and then I was done. I was okay. I felt better. It's just an energy being released. So remember, ask for help, ask for a hug. And the other thing is, if someone is in your space and you are grieving and they tell you to stop crying, you don't do that with them because you need to let them know that that's the whole point of grief. um, People are here, we are all here to hold space, and when someone tells you to stop crying, they're basically telling you to stop grieving, and that's not going to help any. So be bold enough to say, hey, just hold my space and let me cry. That's all I need from you. And if you're doing that with somebody else and they're grieving and it starts to affect you, because a lot of people that happens with, don't stop them, but let them know that you are there to hold that space for them, and that way that they can let that go and heal that. Because I'm telling you again, it's just an energy, all that stuff inside. I hate using the word just, but that's really what it is. It's just an energy, and you are just releasing that energy, and when you're done releasing it, you're going to feel better and better and better and better. It's a progression. So ask, just ask.
I think that's beautiful advice because grievers out there today feel very isolated in so many ways because they have to wear a mask and manage other people's emotions and hide behind the thoughts of grief to make other people feel comfortable. And in reality, they go home at night and unload all that energy you just talked about, gets unloaded in TV or drinking or whatever it may be.
Yeah,
And we have such a big opportunity to help other people. Funny story. We have a big opportunity to help those going through grief. So I take Carolyn's advice, ask for help and
yeah.
ask for people, ask for a hug if it's the right person. Ask. I'll be honest with you guys, by the way. I went through a bad time in grief one day, and there was a big 6'3" black dude outside the grocery store where I went. And long story short, I had no idea this guy was very religious and whatnot, but he saw I was having a bad day. I ended up hugging this guy in the middle of public. People thought I was crazy. Um, he and I became best friends after that. We went down a spiritual walk, which is another talk for another show. But
Yeah.
to Carolyn's point, I ended up hugging a random stranger. And I will say this to
Sometimes
you
that's the
guys.
best thing.
If strangers like us care about you, you just care about strangers because you're never ever alone. That's great advice, Carolyn. Ask for help.
Yeah,
That's a big one.
thank you.
I wanted to ask you as well, if people enjoyed listening to your episode and they want to connect with you outside the podcast here, where can they find you?
Well, I've got a few places. So I have my podcast, Awakening Soul Divinity, and that's on YouTube. Um, Awakening Soul Divinity podcast, or I think it's just Awakening Soul Divinity. I don't remember. If you type Awakening Soul Divinity and you'll find it. And then I am on, that's actually being pushed out to Spotify, Apple, and Amazon. And you can get to that through mindbodyspirit.fm. And then I am on LinkedIn. So I share a lot of my postings over there. So if you're on LinkedIn, you can find out what I'm doing over there and go over to YouTube. Um, Facebook. I have a group on Facebook called, what did I call that? Awakening to Soul Divinity Community. So if you want to join the community, you can come on over there and I'm sharing stuff. That's more like I'm sharing the podcast uh, episodes, but we also are in there sharing, different ways of walking through life together, basically, just to keep building each other up and raising the vibration and covering our truth, healing. I mean, you name it. We need. There's just something better we need than what we're working. It's too much separation. We're trying to build community and connection. So there's that, and I think that's it. I'm not sure. I
Well,
don't know.
what I'll share with listeners, when you get done listening to the podcast, go in the show notes because I will have all of her links to her social media and her website as well. I
Right.
definitely, yeah, is that the one we forgot?
awakeningsouldivinity.com. And then I
Good.
also have another website that I'm working on. Again, I'm revamping it. It's carolinerena.com. But that's going to show the work that I'm going to be doing with grief and some other stuff. But I'm still kind of working on that because I'm my own uh this, like, I'm the editor and I'm the administrative assistant and I'm the marketer and I'm the this and the that. So it's taking a little while to do the website. So it's coming.
But hey, like all good things with grief, time makes it better. And that's
Exactly.
where So I want to invite you guys to look in the show notes after this episode. I will have her websites, social media on there. I definitely recommend checking out her website she has now in her community. I can't stress it enough with you guys, whether you join my community or join Carolyn's. Get into a community in grief if you're going through things because you will find your tribe, you will find your people. And I cannot stress how important that is because when you feel seen and you feel heard and understood, it makes the journey just that much easier for you to
Yeah.
process your emotions, process how you feel, get some perspective that you might not have. But more importantly, walk that journey with somebody because
Mhm.
walking it alone is very hard. So, so Carolyn, I just want to say thank you so much for being on today, and hopefully we'll do another episode here in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd look forward to that for sure. Thank you.
And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Caroline and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Caroline's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.
Yep.